The champagne glass slipped from Jessica's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the country club. Her face had gone completely white as she stared at her phone screen, reading the insurance appraisal she'd just pulled up. Around her, the other bridesmaids fell silent, their earlier laughter dying in their throats. 15 million, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible over the classical music drifting from the main ballroom. It's insured for $15 million. I watched from across the room as my sister Emma's best friends realized they'd spent the last 20 minutes mocking what they thought was a cheap knockoff ring from a gas station. The same ring that was now glittering innocently on my finger, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 hours earlier, I'd been having the worst day of my 26th year. My alarm hadn't gone off, my coffee maker had died, and I'd gotten a flat tire on the way to Emma's bridal shower at the exclusive Willowbrook Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. By the time I finally arrived, mascara slightly smudged and my dress wrinkled from changing the tire, the party was in full swing. Emma rushed over the moment I walked through the mahogany doors. "Naomi, thank God you're here. I was starting to worry something had happened." "Just the usual Murphy's Law situation," I said, smoothing down my navy blue dress. "Sorry I'm late. The tire decided to give up on life right outside Stanford." Emma hugged me, her wedding dress fitting perfectly despite still being 3 weeks away from the actual ceremony. "Don't worry about it. Come on, I want you to meet everyone properly." The country club's private dining room was decorated in Emma's chosen colors of blush pink and gold, with elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. About 15 women were scattered around the room, all impeccably dressed and sporting jewelry that could fund a small country's healthcare system. Emma guided me toward a cluster of women near the gift table. "Ladies, this is my sister Naomi. Naomi, meet my bridesmaids, Jessica, Madison, Brittany, and Courtney." Jessica Hartwell stepped forward first, her blonde hair styled in perfect beach waves and her smile bright enough to power Times Square. She was Emma's maid of honor and had been her roommate at Columbia. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. "Naomi, Emma talks about you constantly. We're so excited to finally meet you." Her voice had that particular tone that wealthy women perfect, sweet on the surface, but with an undertone that suggested she was already cataloging and judging every aspect of my appearance. Madison Chen, a petite woman with a razor-sharp bob and designer glasses, nodded politely. She worked at Goldman Sachs and had the kind of confidence that came from making more money before noon than most people saw in a month. Brittany Morrison and Courtney Walsh flanked them, both looking like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement. Brittany's family owned a prominent law firm in Manhattan, while Courtney's mother was some kind of socialite who threw charity galas that got written up in the society pages. "Your sisters told us you're a teacher," Courtney said, her tone suggesting she'd said garbage collector instead. "How noble." "Elementary school," I confirmed, used to this reaction from Emma's crowd. 3rd grade specifically. "That must be so rewarding," Madison chimed in, though her expression suggested she couldn't imagine anything less appealing. The conversation continued in that polite but distant way that made it clear I was being tolerated rather than welcomed. I'd expected this. Emma and I had grown up in the same middle-class household in suburban Albany, but she'd married into money when she met Richard at business school. His family owned a successful import business, and Emma had seamlessly transitioned into their world of country clubs, charity luncheons, and designer everything. I loved my sister, but her new social circle had always made me feel like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. About an hour into the party, after we'd played the requisite bridal shower games and Emma had opened most of her gifts, I excused myself to use the restroom. The country club's ladies' room was as opulent as everything else: marble countertops, gold fixtures, and hand towels that were probably more expensive than my entire outfit. I was washing my hands when I noticed my reflection in the ornate mirror. My great-grandmother's ring caught the light, and for a moment I smiled. It was the only piece of jewelry I owned that I truly loved, a simple band with what appeared to be a modest diamond. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, just elegant in its simplicity. My great-grandmother Rose had given it to me when I turned 18, along with a story about how my great-grandfather had saved up for months to buy it in 1952. "It's not the biggest diamond, sweetheart," she'd said, "but it was chosen with love. That's what makes it precious." I'd worn it on my right hand ever since, treasuring both the ring and the memory of the woman who'd raised my father after his parents died young. Rose had been the kind of person who found joy in simple things: Sunday dinners, garden flowers, and old movies on television. When I returned to the party, Emma was opening her final gifts. The pile of expensive items kept growing: crystal vases, silver serving pieces, luxury linens with thread counts that sounded like phone numbers. "Oh my God, Emma, look at this Tiffany picture frame!" Jessica gushed over a simple silver frame that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "It's gorgeous," Emma agreed, though I could tell she was getting tired from all the excitement. As the gift opening wound down, the women naturally broke into smaller conversation groups. I found myself somewhat isolated, nursing a glass of sparkling cider and watching Emma's friends dissect the various gifts with the intensity of art appraisers. That's when Courtney noticed my ring. "Oh, cute ring, Naomi," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed condescension. "Where did you get it?" I looked down at my great-grandmother's ring, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It was my great-grandmother's. "How sweet," Jessica said, leaning in for a closer look. "It's so vintage." The way she said vintage made it sound like a polite synonym for outdated trash. Madison squinted at it through her designer glasses. Is that supposed to be a diamond?" "It is," I said, quietly, feeling heat rising in my cheeks. The four women exchanged glances that I pretended not to notice. Brittany giggled softly. "Well, it's very sentimental, I'm sure. Those old costume jewelry pieces from the 50s can be so charming." I felt my jaw clench. "It's not costume jewelry." "Oh, of course not," Courtney said quickly, though her tone suggested she absolutely believed it was. "I just meant that jewelry from that era often had different standards for clarity and cut, before modern techniques, you know." Jessica nodded sagely. "My grandmother has some pieces like that, sweet little rings that look real if you don't examine them too closely." I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that my great-grandfather had spent months saving for this ring, that it had been appraised when Rose's estate was settled. But something in their expressions, that mixture of pity and superiority, made me hold my tongue. Instead, I excused myself and stepped out onto the country club's terrace, needing some air and space away from their casual cruelty. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and I took several deep breaths, trying to shake off the sting of their words. Emma found me there 10 minutes later. "Hey, are you okay? You disappeared." I forced a smile. "I just needed some air. It's beautiful out here." Emma studied my face with the intuition that only siblings possess. "Did something happen? You look upset." "It's nothing, just your friends noticed Great-Grandma Rose's ring." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. "Oh, Naomi, what did they say?" "They think it's costume jewelry, fake." I held up my hand, looking at the ring that had always brought me comfort. They were very polite about it, of course. Emma's expression hardened. "They had no right to comment on your jewelry. I'm going to say something." "No, don't," I caught her arm. "It's your bridal shower. Don't cause drama because of me." "But Naomi." "I'm fine, really. Let's just get through the rest of the party." But as we walked back inside, I could hear Jessica's voice carrying across the room, pitched just loud enough for me to catch fragments. "Sweet that she thinks. Probably from Claire's accessories. Bless her heart." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The familiar phrase, "bless her heart," the Southern passive-aggressive way of saying someone was pitifully clueless, hit harder than any direct insult could have. I spent the rest of the party making polite conversation and avoiding Emma's bridesmaids as much as possible in the confined space. Every time I caught one of them glancing at my hand, I felt a fresh wave of embarrassment. By the time we were saying our goodbyes, I just wanted to get home to my small apartment and forget the whole afternoon. But as I was gathering my purse, I overheard Jessica talking to Madison near the gift table. Can you imagine thinking that little chip of glass is a real diamond? Jessica was saying, her voice low but not quite low enough. I almost felt bad for her. Emma should really talk to her, Madison replied. Someone needs to tell her before she embarrasses herself in public. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the long day, maybe it was the flat tire and the broken coffee maker, and the general sense that the universe was conspiring against me. Or maybe it was just that I'd reached my limit for being condescended to by people who measured worth in dollar signs. I walked over to their little huddle by the gift table, my great-grandmother's ring catching the late afternoon light streaming through the country club's tall windows. Actually, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, you might want to be careful about making assumptions. Jessica's perfectly contoured eyebrows shot up at my interruption. Oh, Naomi, we didn't see you there. Clearly. I stepped closer to their circle, noting how Courtney instinctively took a half step back. You were saying something about assumptions? Madison cleared her throat delicately. We were just, well, we couldn't help but notice your ring. It's very unique. Unique, right. I held up my hand, letting the afternoon sunlight hit the stone directly. You know what else is unique? The fact that none of you bothered to actually look at it before deciding it was fake. Brittany's laugh came out as more of a nervous twitter. Naomi, we weren't trying to be mean. It's just that rings from that era. From 1952, specifically, I interrupted, when my great-grandfather bought this from Hartwell and Sons Jewelers in downtown Albany after saving every spare penny for 8 months. Jessica's face went pale at the mention of Hartwell, her own family name. Her great-grandfather had indeed owned a high-end jewelry store, though she'd never mentioned it during the years Emma had known her. That's impossible, she stammered. Hartwell and Sons was an exclusive establishment. They only dealt in the finest stones. Exactly. I twisted the ring slightly, watching the light fracture through the stone in ways that only genuine diamonds could achieve. My great-grandfather worked 3 jobs to afford this. He wanted something that would last forever for the woman he planned to spend his life with. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Other party guests had started to notice our little drama unfolding near the gift table, conversations dying as people turned to listen. Emma appeared at my elbow, her bridal intuition clearly sensing trouble. Is everything okay over here? Just fine, I said, my eyes never leaving Jessica's increasingly uncomfortable face. I was just educating your friends about the history of jewelry appraisal standards. Naomi, Emma said quietly, a warning in her voice. But I was past caring about keeping the peace. Did you know that in the 1950s, jewelers actually had higher clarity standards than many modern chain stores? They took pride in their craftsmanship. Each stone was hand-selected. Madison had pulled out her phone and was discreetly typing something, probably Googling Hartwell and Sons, I realized with satisfaction. The thing about old jewelry, I continued, is that it was built to last, unlike some modern pieces that prioritize size over quality. My gaze swept meaningfully over their collection of obviously expensive but flashy jewelry. Courtney finally found her voice. Look, we're sorry if we offended you. We just thought... You thought a public school teacher from Albany couldn't possibly own a quality diamond. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of being polite. You saw my dress from Nordstrom Rack, my car that's 7 years old, my job that doesn't come with a trust fund, and you made assumptions. That's not fair, Brittany protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I looked around at their designer outfits, their luxury bags, their jewelry that screamed, "Look how much money I have." When was the last time any of you worked with someone who wasn't already wealthy? When did you last have a conversation with someone whose biggest financial worry wasn't whether to vacation in the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard? Emma touched my arm. Naomi, please. I'm not done. I turned back to Jessica, who was still staring at my ring like it might bite her. Your great-grandfather's jewelry store had a reputation for selling only the finest stones to Albany's most prominent families. My great-grandfather wasn't prominent, but he had something better: persistence and genuine love. Jessica's phone was now in her hands, and I could see she was searching for something, probably trying to verify her family's business. He went to Hartwell & Sons every week for 2 months, I continued, not to buy anything, but to learn. Your great-grandfather taught him about cut, clarity, color, and carat weight. He explained why certain stones were worth the investment and others weren't. The small crowd that had gathered around us was completely silent now. Even the country club staff had paused their cleanup to listen. Emma appeared at my elbow, her bridal intuition clearly sensing trouble. Is everything okay over here? Just fine, I said, my eyes never leaving Jessica's increasingly uncomfortable face. I was just educating your friends about the history of jewelry appraisal standards. Naomi, Emma said quietly, a warning in her voice. But I was past caring about keeping the peace. Did you know that in the 1950s, jewelers actually had higher clarity standards than many modern chain stores? They took pride in their craftsmanship. Each stone was hand-selected. Madison had pulled out her phone and was discreetly typing something, probably Googling Hartwell & Sons, I realized with satisfaction. The thing about old jewelry, I continued, is that it was built to last, unlike some modern pieces that prioritize size over quality. My gaze swept meaningfully over their collection of obviously expensive but flashy jewelry. Courtney finally found her voice. Look, we're sorry if we offended you. We just thought... You thought a public school teacher from Albany couldn't possibly own a quality diamond. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of being polite. You saw my dress from Nordstrom Rack, my car that's 7 years old, my job that doesn't come with a trust fund, and you made assumptions. That's not fair, Brittany protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I looked around at their designer outfits, their luxury bags, their jewelry that screamed, "Look how much money I have." Emma touched my arm. Naomi, please. I'm not done. I turned back to Jessica, who was still staring at my ring like it might bite her. Your great-grandfather's jewelry store had a reputation for selling only the finest stones to Albany's most prominent families. My great-grandfather wasn't prominent, but he had something better: persistence and genuine love. Jessica's phone was now in her hands, and I could see she was searching for something, probably trying to verify her family's business. He went to Hartwell & Sons every week for 2 months, I continued, not to buy anything, but to learn. Your great-grandfather taught him about cut, clarity, color, and carat weight. He explained why certain stones were worth the investment and others weren't. The small crowd that had gathered around us was completely silent now. Even the country club staff had paused their cleanup to listen. Emma appeared at my elbow, her bridal intuition clearly sensing trouble. Is everything okay over here? Just fine, I said, my eyes never leaving Jessica's increasingly uncomfortable face. I was just educating your friends about the history of jewelry appraisal standards. Naomi, Emma said quietly, a warning in her voice. But I was past caring about keeping the peace. Did you know that in the 1950s, jewelers actually had higher clarity standards than many modern chain stores? They took pride in their craftsmanship. Each stone was hand-selected. Madison had pulled out her phone and was discreetly typing something, probably Googling Hartwell & Sons, I realized with satisfaction. The thing about old jewelry, I continued, is that it was built to last, unlike some modern pieces that prioritize size over quality. My gaze swept meaningfully over their collection of obviously expensive but flashy jewelry. Courtney finally found her voice. Look, we're sorry if we offended you. We just thought... You thought a public school teacher from Albany couldn't possibly own a quality diamond. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of being polite. You saw my dress from Nordstrom Rack, my car that's 7 years old, my job that doesn't come with a trust fund, and you made assumptions. That's not fair, Brittany protested, though her voice lacked conviction. When was the last time any of you worked with someone who wasn't already wealthy? When did you last have a conversation with someone whose biggest financial worry wasn't whether to vacation in the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard? Emma touched my arm. Naomi, please. I'm not done. I turned back to Jessica, who was still staring at my ring like it might bite her. Your great-grandfather's jewelry store had a... Jessica had gone from pale to green. Her phone search had clearly confirmed that Hartwell & Sons had indeed been a prestigious jewelry establishment, and that my story about her great-grandfather was entirely plausible. That's not necessary, she said quickly. Oh, but I think it is. I held out the appraisal document, especially since you were all so concerned about me embarrassing myself in public. Madison reluctantly took the paper, her Goldman Sachs training making her automatically scan for the relevant numbers. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock that crossed her features. This says, she stammered. What does it say, Madison? I asked sweetly. She cleared her throat. It says the current market value is... She paused, clearly hoping she'd misread something. Go on. $2.8 million. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the classical music playing in the main ballroom 3 rooms away. Courtney's mouth fell open. Brittany made a small choking sound. Jessica looked like she might actually faint. 2.8 million, I repeated thoughtfully. Though that was the appraisal from 2 years ago, diamond prices have gone up considerably since then, especially for stones with this level of clarity and provenance. Emma stared at me in shock. Naomi, I had no idea. Why would you? It's just a ring I wear every day. I don't make a big deal about it. I folded the appraisal back up and returned it to my purse. But I thought it was important for your friends to understand that value isn't always about showing off. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that I'd been lecturing them about assumptions while carrying around proof of my ring's worth in my purse. But sometimes you had to fight fire with fire. I should probably mention, I added casually, that I've had several offers from collectors over the years. Apparently, stones with this particular cut and clarity from the 1950s are extremely rare. Something about the way they were hand-cut versus modern laser techniques. Jessica finally managed to speak. Why didn't you say something earlier? Because I shouldn't have to prove my worth to be treated with basic respect. I looked around at their stunned faces. And because truly valuable things don't need to announce themselves. The lesson hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. The aftermath of my revelation was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Jessica had sunk into one of the country club's upholstered chairs, her face buried in her manicured hands. Madison was frantically scrolling through her phone, probably calculating how much she'd just insulted in terms of actual market value. Courtney kept opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, while Brittany had gone completely silent for the first time since I'd met her. Emma grabbed my elbow and steered me toward a quieter corner of the room. Naomi, what the hell? You've been wearing a $3 million ring around like it's nothing? It's not $3 million, it's 2.8, I corrected automatically, then caught myself. And that was 2 years ago. The appraiser said it could be worth considerably more now. That's not the point, Emma's voice was a harsh whisper. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? You take the subway wearing that thing. You go grocery shopping. You teach third graders who probably grab your hands constantly. I hadn't actually thought about the security implications. To me, it had always just been Great-Grandma Rose's ring, a connection to family history, not a financial asset that required armed guards. I have insurance, I said weakly. Insurance doesn't protect you from getting mugged. Emma ran her hands through her perfectly styled hair, disrupting the careful waves. God, Naomi, I can't believe you never told me. It never seemed important. You know how I am about family heirlooms. I figured you'd think I was being sentimental about something worth maybe a few $1,000s. Meanwhile, across the room, the bridesmaids had huddled together in what appeared to be an emergency damage control session. I could see Jessica's phone out, and from their animated gestures, they were clearly researching something intensively. Other party guests had started to drift over, having caught enough of our conversation to realize something significant had happened. Mrs. Patterson, the country club president and mother of one of Emma's college friends, approached with the predatory smile of someone who smells gossip. "Naomi, dear, I couldn't help but overhear. Did you say that lovely ring of yours has some interesting provenance?" Before I could answer, Jessica appeared at my shoulder, her earlier composure somewhat restored, but her face still pale. "Naomi, I owe you an enormous apology. I just spoke with my grandmother, and she confirmed that Hartwell and Sons did indeed have a customer matching your great-grandfather's description in 1952. The admission clearly cost her, but I had to give her credit for making it publicly. She remembers the story because it became somewhat legendary in our family," Jessica continued. "A young man who came in every week to learn about diamonds then commissioned a custom setting for what she called one of the most perfect stones they'd ever sold." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. How fascinating! And what kind of stone are we talking about? I found myself in the uncomfortable position of having a dozen wealthy women staring expectantly at my hand. This was exactly the kind of attention I'd spent my entire life avoiding. "It's just a family ring," I said diplomatically. But Madison, who had apparently found her voice again, wasn't about to let me downplay it now. "She's being modest. It's a 2.94 carat diamond with D-color grading and FL clarity. The insurance appraisal lists it as exceptional quality with historical significance." I stared at her. "How do you know those specifications?" Madison held up her phone. "I may have taken a photo of the appraisal document when you weren't looking. Professional habit. I analyze investment-grade assets for a living." "You photographed my private insurance documents?" The violation felt almost worse than their earlier mockery. "Madison," Emma's voice was sharp, "you can't just—" "It's fine," Madison said quickly. "I deleted it already, but not before I ran the specifications through our firm's gemstone database." She paused dramatically. "Naomi, do you have any idea how rare stones of that quality actually are?" "Apparently rare enough that strangers feel entitled to photograph my personal documents," I replied dryly. But Mrs. Patterson was leaning in with renewed interest. "How rare are we talking?" Madison glanced at me apologetically, but continued. "Diamonds with FL, that's flawless, clarity and D-color grading from that era represent less than 0.1% of stones currently on the market. Most were snapped up by major collectors decades ago." "Which explains why I've had offers," I admitted reluctantly. "Last year, someone from Sotheby's contacted me after seeing it at my cousin's wedding. They wanted to include it in an auction of exceptional vintage stones." The circle of women around us had grown larger, and I was beginning to feel like a specimen under a microscope. This was exactly why I'd never made a big deal about the ring's value. I didn't want to become the girl who was defined by her jewelry. Courtney, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "What did you tell them? Sotheby's, I mean." "I told them it wasn't for sale. It's not an investment piece. It's my great-grandmother's ring." I looked around at their incredulous faces. "Some things are worth more than money." "But the insurance premiums alone must be astronomical," Brittany said, having apparently found her voice again. "They're manageable," I lied. The truth was, the insurance premiums took a significant chunk of my teacher's salary, but I'd never considered not insuring it. The ring was irreplaceable, and not just financially. Mrs. Patterson was studying me with new interest. "You know, dear, we have a jewelry and gemstone appreciation society here at the club. I think our members would be fascinated to hear the story of your ring." "That's very kind, but I'm not really the public speaking type." "Oh, but you must. We rarely get to see stones of such quality with such wonderful provenance. Most of our members only encounter pieces like this in museums." I could see Emma shooting me warning looks, but before I could politely decline, Jessica interrupted. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I think that's a wonderful idea." Her tone had shifted completely from earlier. Now she sounded almost reverent. The story of how her great-grandfather researched and saved this ring is exactly the kind of romantic history that makes jewelry truly special. I stared at her, trying to figure out her angle. Was this genuine admiration, or was she trying to make amends for her earlier behavior? Plus, Madison added, from an investment perspective, the story demonstrates why provenance and craftsmanship matter more than size. It's a valuable lesson for anyone considering jewelry purchases. I'm not sure I want to turn my great-grandmother's ring into a lecture topic, I said carefully. But Mrs. Patterson was already pulling out her phone. Let me just check our calendar. We meet on the third Thursday of every month. Our next meeting is, oh, perfect, next week. You could be our guest speaker. Mrs. Patterson, I really don't think. The honorarium is quite generous, she added with a meaningful look. We typically pay our speakers $2,500 for an evening presentation. I felt Emma's sharp intake of breath beside me. $2,500 would cover my insurance premiums for the next 6 months. You wouldn't have to do anything elaborate, Mrs. Patterson continued. Just tell the story of how your great-grandfather acquired the ring, maybe discuss the historical context of 1950s jewelry craftsmanship. Our members would be thrilled. I looked around at the faces surrounding me, some curious, some calculating, some genuinely interested. A few hours ago, these same women had been dismissing my ring as costume jewelry. Now they wanted to pay me to talk about it. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, dear, but don't think too long. Word spreads quickly in our circles. Once people hear about a stone like this, you'll have more speaking requests than you know what to do with. As if on cue, Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her eyes widened. Oh my God, she breathed. My grandmother just sent me a photo from the family archives. It's a newspaper clipping from 1952 about exceptional diamond sales at Hartwell & Sons. She looked up at me with something approaching awe. There's a picture of your ring. Jessica's hands were trembling as she held up her phone, the black and white newspaper clipping clearly visible on the screen. The headline read, "Local Jeweler Showcases Exceptional Stones." And there, in grainy 1950s photography, was an unmistakable image of my great-grandmother's ring. This is impossible, Courtney whispered, leaning in to get a better look at the screen. But it wasn't impossible. It was right there in front of us. The photograph showed my ring alongside 2 other pieces, with a caption that read, "Among the finest examples of diamond cutting excellence available to Albany residents, these pieces represent the pinnacle of craftsmanship available at Hartwell & Sons." Mrs. Patterson had materialized beside Jessica, reading over her shoulder with the intensity of an art historian discovering a lost masterpiece. Good heavens, that's from the Albany Times-Union Society section. They only featured the most exceptional pieces. There's more, Jessica said, scrolling through what appeared to be a digital archive her grandmother had sent. Look at this. The next image was a handwritten letter on Hartwell & Sons letterhead, dated December 15, 1952. Even on the small phone screen, I could make out portions of the elegant cursive writing. Can you read what it says? Madison asked, her earlier financial analyst composure completely abandoned. Jessica squinted at the screen. It's addressed to Mr. James Thompson, care of Albany Public Works Department. That must be your great-grandfather, Naomi. My heart stopped. James Thompson had indeed been my great-grandfather's name, and he had worked for the city's Public Works Department his entire career. What does the letter say? Emma pressed. Jessica began reading aloud. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has been our distinct pleasure to work with you these past months on the selection of your engagement ring. Your dedication to understanding the finer points of diamond quality has been exceptional, and we believe the stone you have chosen will serve as a lasting testament to your devotion. She paused, scrolling down to continue reading. The 2.94 carat diamond you selected represents one of the finest examples of cutting excellence we have had the privilege to offer. The D-color grading and flawless clarity, combined with the precision of the cut, make this piece truly extraordinary. The gathered crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. But here's the really interesting part, Jessica continued.
Your insistence on authenticity documentation and your questions about long-term value preservation demonstrate a sophistication that we rarely encounter. As discussed, we are pleased to provide detailed certification and a 25-year value guarantee. A 25-year guarantee? Brittany gasped. In 1952? That's unheard of, Mrs. Patterson confirmed. Jewelers simply didn't offer guarantees like that unless they were absolutely certain of a piece's quality and future value.
Jessica kept reading. We are also honored to include this piece in our annual showcase of exceptional stones, as featured in today's Times Union. It is our belief that this ring will become a treasured family heirloom for generations to come. The letter was signed by Harrison Hartwell III, Jessica's great-grandfather. There's one more thing, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. My grandmother says there's a follow-up letter from 1977, 25 years later exactly. She scrolled to another image, this one showing a more modern typed letter. It's addressed to Rose Thompson, Jessica read. That would be your great-grandmother, right? I nodded, too stunned to speak. Dear Mrs. Thompson, it has come to our attention through our records that this year marks the 25th anniversary of your late husband's purchase of the exceptional diamond ring from our establishment. As promised in our original correspondence, we are writing to confirm that this piece has not only maintained its value, but has appreciated significantly beyond our original projections. Mrs. Patterson was practically vibrating with excitement. What kind of appreciation are they talking about? Jessica continued reading. Current market evaluation suggests the piece is now worth approximately 15 times its original purchase price, making it one of our most successful long-term investments. We would be honored to discuss acquisition options should you ever wish to consider a sale. 15 times the original value? Madison murmured, her mind clearly calculating. And that was in 1977. What would that make it worth now? Considerably more than $2.8 million, I said quietly, the full implications beginning to dawn on me. Emma grabbed my arm. Naomi, do you realize what this means? You're not just wearing a family heirloom, you're wearing a documented piece of jewelry history. But I was thinking about something else entirely. Jessica, does that letter mention what my great-grandfather originally paid for the ring? She scrolled back through the images. Here it is. In the original 1952 letter, he paid $847. The number hit me like a physical blow. In 1952, $847 was nearly 6 months' salary for a public works employee. My great-grandfather had literally saved half a year's wages to buy this ring. That's over $9,000 in today's money, Madison calculated automatically. For a man supporting a family during the post-war recession, that would have been an enormous sacrifice. I thought about the stories my great-grandmother had told me, how James had worked extra shifts, taken on side jobs, even sold his beloved fishing boat to save up for her ring. I'd always assumed she was exaggerating for romantic effect. The sacrifice makes it even more valuable, Mrs. Patterson said softly, the story behind the stone. Suddenly, Courtney's phone buzzed loudly, making everyone jump. She glanced at it and her face went pale. What is it? Brittany asked. It's my mother, Courtney stammered. Someone already told her about Naomi's ring. She wants to know if we can arrange an introduction. Your mother? I asked, confused. Emma explained. Courtney's mother chairs the board of the Metropolitan Museum's jewelry collection. She's one of the most influential people in the gemstone world. Courtney was still staring at her phone in shock. She says if the provenance documentation is authentic, the Metropolitan would be interested in featuring the ring in their upcoming exhibition on American Jewelry Heritage 1950 to 1960. The room erupted in excited chatter, but I felt overwhelmed. In the span of 3 hours, I'd gone from being mocked for wearing fake jewelry to potentially having my great-grandmother's ring featured in one of the world's most prestigious museums. I need some air, I announced, pushing through the crowd toward the terrace. Emma followed me outside, closing the French doors behind us to muffle the excited voices inside. This is insane, I said, leaning against the terrace railing. This morning, I was a third-grade teacher wearing my great-grandmother's ring. Now, apparently, I'm some kind of jewelry heiress with museum-quality artifacts. Are you okay with all this attention? Emma asked gently. I looked down at the ring, watching it catch the late afternoon sunlight exactly the way it had thousands of times before. But somehow it looked different now. Not just because I knew its monetary value, but because I understood the full scope of its story. I keep thinking about Great-Grandma Rose, I said. She wore this ring every day for 60 years. She washed dishes with it, gardened with it, changed diapers with it. She never treated it like a museum piece. Maybe that's exactly why it should be in a museum, Emma said thoughtfully, to show people that extraordinary things can be part of ordinary lives. Before I could respond, the terrace doors burst open and Mrs. Patterson emerged, her face flushed with excitement. Naomi, dear, you're not going to believe this. I just received a call from Harrison Hartwell IV, Jessica's cousin who runs the family foundation. He wants to discuss acquiring the ring for their permanent collection. My stomach dropped. Acquiring it? For $7 million. $7 million. The number hung in the air between us like a challenge to everything I thought I knew about my life. Mrs. Patterson was beaming as if she'd personally discovered buried treasure, while Emma looked like she might hyperventilate. $7 million, I repeated slowly, for my great-grandmother's ring? It's an extraordinary offer, Mrs. Patterson gushed. Harrison Hartwell IV rarely makes acquisitions of this magnitude for the Foundation's collection. He must have recognized the historical significance immediately. Through the terrace doors, I could see the bridesmaids huddled around Jessica's phone, their earlier smugness replaced by something approaching reverence. Madison was frantically typing notes, probably calculating compound interest rates and investment returns. Brittany kept glancing toward the terrace with an expression I couldn't quite read. Courtney was on her phone, undoubtedly updating her museum board mother about this latest development. What exactly would happen if I sold it to the foundation? I asked, though part of me couldn't believe I was even considering the question. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up. Oh, it would be displayed in their private collection gallery. The Hartwell Foundation has one of the most prestigious jewelry exhibitions on the East Coast. Thousands of people would see it every year. But they wouldn't know it was my great-grandmother's ring. It would just be another display piece. Not necessarily, Emma interjected thoughtfully. Foundation collections often include the full provenance story. Your great-grandfather's dedication, the sacrifice he made, the way it stayed in your family for 3 generations. That's exactly the kind of human story that makes jewelry exhibitions meaningful. Before I could respond, Jessica appeared on the terrace, her face flushed with excitement. Naomi, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Harrison just called me directly. He's driving up from Manhattan right now. He wants to see the ring in person. Tonight? I asked incredulously. He's apparently been searching for pieces like this for years. Stones with documented provenance from his great-grandfather's shop are incredibly rare. Most were sold or lost decades ago. I looked down at my hand, where the ring sat exactly as it had every day for the past 8 years. Suddenly, the familiar weight felt different, heavier somehow, laden with implications I'd never considered. There's something else, Jessica continued hesitantly. Harrison mentioned that if you're not interested in selling, the foundation would be willing to create a special exhibition around the ring's story. They'd cover insurance, security, everything. You could loan it for specific exhibitions and still keep ownership. Like the Hope Diamond, Mrs. Patterson added helpfully. It's technically on loan to the Smithsonian, but the family retains ownership. Emma was studying my face with concern. Naomi, you look overwhelmed. Maybe we should slow this down. She was right. I felt like I was drowning in possibilities I'd never imagined. This morning, my biggest concern had been whether my tire insurance would cover the flat. Now I was contemplating decisions that could change my entire life trajectory. Can I ask you something? I said to Jessica. Why does this matter so much to your family? I mean, beyond the obvious monetary value. Jessica's expression grew serious. My great-grandfather built Hartwell & Sons on the principle that exceptional craftsmanship should be preserved for future generations. He believed that truly extraordinary pieces belonged in history, not hidden away in private collections where no one could appreciate them. She paused, glancing back through the doors at her friends. When I heard your story today, I realized how wrong we'd been about you. We made assumptions based on appearances, just like people probably made assumptions about your great-grandfather when he walked into our family store. He probably didn't look like their typical customer, I admitted. Exactly. But my great-grandfather saw past that, to recognize someone who truly understood quality and was willing to sacrifice for it. That's why he wrote those letters, why he offered the guarantee. He respected your great-grandfather's dedication. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 generations later, Jessica's family was trying to honor that same dedication by preserving what my great-grandfather had worked so hard to buy. What would you do, I asked her directly, if it were your family's ring? Jessica considered the question seriously. Honestly, I think I'd want to find a way to honor both the financial opportunity and the family legacy. Maybe that means the exhibition loan program. You keep the ring, but you also share its story with people who can appreciate what it represents. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and couldn't help but smile. "What is it?" asked. "It's from my principal," I said, showing them the screen. "Someone apparently called the school to verify that I actually work there. She wants to know why jewelry collectors are asking about my employment status." The absurdity of the situation hit me suddenly, and I started laughing. Not polite chuckling, but genuine, stress-releasing laughter that made Emma join in despite her worry. "This is completely insane," I said between laughs. "6 hours ago, your friends thought I was wearing a mood ring from a gas station. Now Harrison Hartwell IV is driving up from Manhattan to look at my great-grandmother's jewelry." "Life has a funny way of surprising us," Mrs. Patterson observed sagely. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Miss Smith, this is Harrison Hartwell IV. I understand you have a piece from my great-grandfather's collection that I'd very much like to discuss with you." His voice was warm and professional, with just a hint of excitement that reminded me of a collector who'd finally found a missing piece of his puzzle. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm still processing all of this. It's been quite an afternoon." "I can imagine. Would it be possible for us to meet this evening? I'm about 40 minutes from Greenwich, and I'd love to hear the full story directly from you." I looked around at the faces watching me expectantly. Emma worried but supportive, Jessica hopeful, Mrs. Patterson practically vibrating with anticipation. "Mr. Hartwell, before we meet, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a valuable ring to me. It's the last physical connection I have to my great-grandparents' love story." "I completely understand, Miss Smith. That's exactly why it's so important. Great jewelry isn't just about stones and metal. It's about the human stories they carry." After hanging up, I stood quietly on the terrace for a moment, watching the sun set over the Connecticut countryside. Emma moved to stand beside me. She said softly, "Whatever you decide, I support you." I said slowly, "I want to hear what he has to say, not because I necessarily want to sell, but because I want to understand what my great-grandfather really accomplished when he walked into that jewelry store 73 years ago." As we walked back inside, I noticed that the earlier mockery and condescension had been completely replaced by genuine respect. Jessica's friends were no longer looking at me like I was an outsider who didn't belong in their world. They were looking at me like someone who had something they'd never seen before. And maybe that was the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the most extraordinary things come in the most ordinary packages, and the biggest mistake you can make is assuming you know someone's worth based on what you can see on the surface. My great-grandmother's ring caught the country club chandelier one more time as we headed back into the party, reminding me that some treasures are worth waiting 70 years to be properly recognized. An hour later, Harrison Hartwell IV arrived at the country club with the kind of understated elegance that only comes from old money. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the sort of confident demeanor that suggested he was used to handling million-dollar transactions before lunch.
He brought with him a leather portfolio that looked older than my apartment and a jeweler's loupe that caught the light like a tiny crystal. But what surprised me most was the genuine warmth in his eyes when he introduced himself. Miss Smith, thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. I hope you'll forgive my enthusiasm, but finding documented pieces from my great-grandfather's collection is like discovering lost family photographs.
We'd moved to a private dining room at the country club, away from the curious stares of the remaining party guests. Emma sat beside me for moral support, while Jessica had positioned herself across the table, clearly invested in the outcome. Before we discuss anything else, Harrison continued, I'd love to hear the story in your own words. Jessica shared some details, but I suspect there's much more to tell. So I told him everything. About Great-Grandma Rose's stories, about carrying the ring as my daily connection to family history, about the insurance appraisals I'd never really thought much about. I explained how I'd learned about quality and craftsmanship through Rose's memories of her husband's research process. Harrison listened with the intensity of someone recording oral history, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates or details. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your great-grandfather sounds like he was an extraordinary man, he said finally. The kind of customer my great-grandfather wrote about in his private journals, someone who understood that true value goes beyond price tags. He opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick folder. I brought some additional documentation that I think you'll find interesting. These are the original workshop notes from when your ring was crafted. The papers he spread across the table were yellowed with age, but remarkably well preserved. I could see detailed sketches of the ring's setting, notes about the stone's specifications, and what appeared to be multiple iterations of the design. Your great-grandfather didn't just buy a ring, Harrison explained. He collaborated on its creation. These notes show that he met with our head craftsman 3 different times to discuss the setting design. He wanted something that would showcase the diamond's brilliance while being practical enough for daily wear. Emma leaned forward to examine the sketches. These are beautiful. Look at the detailed work. The setting was revolutionary for its time, Harrison continued. Most engagement rings in 1952 used prong settings that were more decorative than functional. Your great-grandfather specifically requested a design that would protect the stone while maximizing light exposure. It was engineering as much as artistry. I studied the sketches with new appreciation. I'd always loved the ring's elegant simplicity, but I'd never realized how much thought had gone into its construction. There's something else, Harrison said, producing another document. This is a copy of the original stone certification, signed by the Gemologic Institute of America. In 1952, this level of documentation was almost unheard of. Your great-grandfather insisted on it. The certification was incredibly detailed, with measurements, clarity grades, and even a small diagram showing the stone's internal characteristics. At the bottom, I could see a note in careful handwriting, "Stone selected by customer after extensive education and consideration, H. Hartwell III." He really did know what he was buying, I murmured. More than that, he knew what he was investing in. Look at this final notation. Harrison pointed to a line I'd missed. Customer educated on long-term care and value preservation. Stone expected to appreciate significantly over time due to exceptional quality and increasing rarity of this grade. They were predicting future value appreciation in 1952? Emma asked incredulously. My great-grandfather was ahead of his time in many ways. He understood that truly exceptional stones would become increasingly rare as mining techniques changed and demand grew. Harrison smiled. He was right, obviously. Stones with this clarity and cuts from that era are virtually impossible to find today. I felt a strange mixture of pride and overwhelm. My great-grandfather hadn't just bought beautiful jewelry, he'd made what amounted to a sophisticated investment while demonstrating his devotion to Rose. Now, Harrison said, his tone shifting slightly, let's discuss options for the ring's future. He outlined several possibilities beyond the straight purchase offer. The foundation could create a traveling exhibition featuring the ring's story, taking it to museums across the country. They could establish an educational program about 1950s craftsmanship and working-class aspiration using the ring as a centerpiece. Or they could work with me to create a documentary about family heirlooms and their hidden histories. The monetary offers range from the $7 million I mentioned earlier for outright purchase to various loan and licensing arrangements that could generate ongoing income while keeping you as the owner. He slid a detailed proposal across the table. The numbers were staggering. Even the most conservative loan arrangement would generate more annual income than my teacher's salary. But here's what I think you should consider most carefully, Harrison continued. Your great-grandfather spent months learning about diamonds because he wanted to make a choice that would last generations. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Now, you have the opportunity to ensure that his dedication and Rose's treasuring of this ring can inspire other people. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my parents' number from their retirement home in Florida. I should probably take this, I said apologetically. They're expecting an update on Emma's shower. Naomi, honey, my mother's voice came through clearly. Your father and I just got the strangest call from your cousin Michael in Albany. He says someone from a jewelry foundation has been asking the Historical Society about your great-grandfather's employment records. I glanced around the table at the expectant faces. Mom, it's a long story, but Michael also mentioned that someone contacted the Albany Times-Union asking about accessing their 1952 archives. Honey, what's going on? The ring, Mom. Great-Grandma Rose's ring. It turns out it's worth significantly more than we thought. There was a long pause. How much more, sweetheart? Several million. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my father's voice came on the line. My mother had clearly put the phone on speaker. Naomi, are you absolutely certain about this? Your great-grandmother never mentioned anything about the ring being particularly valuable. I'm sitting here looking at the original documentation, Dad. Great-grandpa James knew exactly what he was buying. He just never made a big deal about it. That sounds like him, my father said softly. He was never one to boast. But Naomi, what are you going to do? It was the question everyone had been polite to ask directly. Harrison had laid out multiple options, each with compelling arguments. Emma was clearly torn between excitement and worry. Jessica seemed invested in seeing the ring find its way back into her sphere of influence. I honestly don't know yet, Dad. There are a lot of factors to consider. Well, my mother said practically, just remember that your great-grandmother wore that ring every day because it made her happy. Whatever you decide, make sure it will make her happy too. After hanging up, I looked around the table at the faces watching me. She's right, you know. Rose never treated this ring like a museum piece or an investment. She gardened with it, cooked with it, held her grandchildren with it. It was part of her daily life. And maybe that's exactly the story people need to hear, Harrison said gently. In our modern world, we often assume that valuable things need to be locked away and protected. Your great-grandmother proved that beautiful, precious things can also be lived with and loved. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about true value not needing to announce itself. Maybe this is the universe's way of making sure Great-Grandma Rose's story gets told. I twisted the ring on my finger, feeling its familiar weight. For 71 years, it had been a symbol of love, commitment, and family continuity. Now, it had the potential to become something larger, a piece of history that could teach people about dedication, craftsmanship, and the hidden stories that surround us every day. Mr. Hartwell, I said finally, I'd like to propose something different. What if we started with a smaller exhibition, maybe just here in Connecticut, and see how people respond to the story? If it resonates, we could consider expanding from there. Harrison's face lit up. A pilot program. I like that approach. It allows you to test the waters without committing to anything irreversible. And, I continued, I want to make sure that any exhibition emphasizes the human story. This isn't just about a valuable diamond. It's about a working-class man who saved for months to buy something beautiful for the woman he loved. And about a woman who cherished that gift for 60 years. That's exactly the kind of story that makes jewelry exhibitions meaningful, Jessica said, her earlier competitiveness replaced by genuine enthusiasm. As we continued discussing possibilities, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in how I thought about the ring. It was still Great Grandma Rose's ring, still my daily connection to family history, but now I understand that keeping it to myself might actually be the selfish choice. My great-grandfather had worked 3 jobs and sold his fishing boat to afford this ring. Rose had treasured it through 6 decades of marriage, through raising children and burying parents and celebrating grandchildren. Their story deserved to be told. And maybe, just maybe, sharing their story could help other people recognize the extraordinary things in their own ordinary lives. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.